Before we dive in, we're advising viewers to think this through carefully. The content ahead is purely for educational and entertainment value. This is the raw testimony from the federal court trial of Sean Diddy Combs, as reported by Inner City Press. Day 12 of Diddy's trial was expected to unfold like any other. There were more documents, more filings, more routine procedures. But when Eddie Murphy slipped into the courtroom through the back door, everything shifted. The reporters jumped to their feet in surprise. The jury leaned in toward Diddy and he froze in shock. No one knew Eddie was about to testify. Not the press and not even most of the legal teams in the room. But what he swore under oath sent shockwaves far beyond those courtroom walls. Eddie started with, "I've stayed silent for decades now. But after what I saw, I had to step away from Hollywood, and I've carried that burden ever since." Eddie Murphy sat straight in the witness chair, his suit impeccable, his demeanor utterly calm. Yet his eyes carried the weight of something far older than Hollywood itself. When the judge asked him to state his name for the record, he did so straightforwardly. Then he glanced over at Diddy, who sat quietly at the defense table. Eddie adjusted the mic and said something no one saw coming. "I left Hollywood because I'd seen too much and couldn't forget it." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The court leaned in as Eddie began his story, explaining that back in 2006, he was at the tail end of a career resurgence with big invitations, fresh studio deals, and award buzz. He said, "I wasn't short on work. The phone rang off the hook every day. I was being chased like I was back in my 20s. Right then one night I got an invitation, a casual call from a well-known producer. He mentioned a gathering at a private estate in the Hollywood Hills. Nothing official, just the kind of party where careers get made and alliances form." Murphy, curious but cautious, agreed to go. He said he'd heard about these gatherings for years. Everyone in Hollywood had stories about Diddy's infamous nights where phones were confiscated, cameras banned, and guests told to just live the experience. Eddie said, "I think that's just par for the course. There was music, drinks, and everyone striking poses. But when I pulled up, I knew right away something was off. There were only whispers and piercing stares. The place was as quiet as a church, but not in a holy way." He described arriving at a massive estate with iron gates that only opened after a biometric scan. A server in a black vest met him at the curb, took his phone, and handed him a small card that read, "Just one rule. Tonight, be yourself." There was no electronic vibe inside. It was downright chilling. No music, no loud chatter, just whispers and those intense stares. The place was as quiet as a church, but not in a holy way. With a haunted look on his face, Eddie stepped into the main living room and scanned the room. He reunited with actors he'd known for years. Some he'd worked with before, others who had never been to parties like this. There were athletes, executives, and everyone acting strangely. No one was drunk or wild, just calculated and cautious, like they knew they were being watched. Then a woman in high heels and a man in a robe walked past him, silently heading down the side hallway. That's when I realized it. Eddie told the court, "This isn't about celebration. This is about power." The prosecutor asked Eddie what made him stay even for a few more minutes. He replied, "Because I needed to understand. I had to witness it myself, and God forgive me. I did." After wandering for a few minutes, Eddie said a man he hadn't seen in years approached him. It was Diddy. "That one now, it's eating out of my hand." Sonorm. But the most chilling moment was when Diddy stopped in front of a thick wooden door and turned to Eddie. He just stared. He walked up to me like we were old buddies, threw an arm around my shoulder and said, "My friend, it's time for you to head home." Murphy smiled faintly as he recalled it, but the smile faded fast. He wasn't talking about Hollywood. What he meant was something deeper. Eddie described Diddy as calm, confident, but with a cold edge in his eyes. He led me through the house like he was proud of something. Not the art, not the space. He was proud of what was happening inside those rooms. As they went, Diddy pointed out different guests and whispered things like, "That guy just greenlit a $200 million film." Or, "That one, now it's eating out of my hand." But the most chilling moment was when Diddy stopped in front of a thick wooden door and turned to Eddie. He looked straight into my face and said, "This is where choices are made. Do you want to keep being funny and broke? Or do you want to level up?" Eddie said he tried to laugh it off, thinking it was some elaborate Hollywood joke. But Diddy didn't laugh. He just stared, waiting for an answer. At that moment, Murphy noticed something else. Inside the room, barely visible through the crack in the door, was a camera tripod not hidden at all. I saw people entering that room with worried faces. I saw them come out either grinning like they'd won the lottery or looking completely empty. Eddie didn't interfere. Instead, he backed away, pretending he needed a drink. Diddy just smiled and said, "No rush. We're all family here." Then he disappeared down the hallway. That moment was the first real warning sign. Eddie said it was a line in the sand. It wasn't a party anymore. It was starting to feel like an initiation. He stepped outside for a moment to collect himself, but a woman at the exit stopped him. "You're not done yet, are you?" she asked, handing him a drink. No one leaves before the experience is over. That phrase, "the experience," echoed in his mind. Murphy walked back into the main living room, and what he saw next confirmed all his fears. Eddie kept his voice steady as he recalled the moment he saw something that would haunt him forever. They led a group of us into a back room. The lights were dim, the music off. There were velvet curtains, candles, and a long table with silver trays on top. He was brought in with some A-listers, including a rising action star he hesitated to name, but under the prosecutor's urging, he confirmed it was Dwayne Johnson. The room fell into a heavy silence. Diddy was standing at the head of the table smiling like he was hosting a dinner theater. "Tonight is about how far you'll go," he said to the room, "because greatness doesn't come cheap. Everyone want to run Hollywood, show me." A tray was placed in front of Dwayne Johnson, covered and polished. A gloved man opened the lid. Underneath was a live monkey brain, still pink and steaming. Some in the room laughed awkwardly. Others looked away, but Diddy said, "Come on, Rock. You eat it. The role is yours." Eddie's voice choked up a bit as he described what happened next. Dwayne hesitated, glanced around, and then went through with it. He just swallowed and carried on. Diddy clapped like a proud father. "That's exactly what I'm talking about," he said before scanning the room. "Who's next?" Eddie said he froze up. I felt sick. I looked for the door, but then Diddy stepped up and stood right in front of me. He stared at Murphy and said, "Are you ready, preacher boy?" Murphy replied, "I'm not here for this." Diddy leaned in and whispered, "Then why are you here?" The court sat in silence as Eddie described walking out of that room, not in a panic but with purpose. I wasn't afraid of what they might do to me. I was afraid of what they could do to others. As he left, Diddy shouted, "You'll be back when you're really ready to do this." Eddie never went back. He also never worked in Hollywood the same way again. "I told him I was a man of God," Eddie said slowly, adjusting in the witness chair. "And I meant it. I told him I wouldn't participate. I wouldn't eat anything. I wouldn't sign anything. And I sure as hell wouldn't sell my soul to fit into any circle." He paused, looking at the jury. And that's when Diddy said it, "If you don't play the game plays you." Murphy recounted that after refusing Diddy's invitation to join what he called the experience, he became a target not physically, but symbolically. "The way he laughed at me," Eddie said, shaking his head, he turned to the room and said, "Look at this church boy. He thinks faith will land him a franchise." The room erupted in uneasy laughter, nervous chuckles, but that was enough. "I'm not ashamed," Eddie said. "I'm disgusted. I realized the party wasn't about testing loyalty. It was about finding out who was desperate." Eddie testified that after leaving the estate that night, he knew something had changed. "I didn't just walk out of a party. I walked out of Hollywood's secret vault, the part no one talks about, the side behind the velvet rope where favors are traded for silence and humiliation is currency." In the months that followed, everything started to shift. Projects that were greenlit suddenly got shelved. Roles that were written for him were recast. His agent of 7 years stopped returning calls. A producer who had previously praised his work reportedly told a colleague, "He's not connected anymore." Eddie looked straight ahead as he continued, "Connected to what?" That's what I kept asking. "Connected to Diddy. Connected to the monkey brain and the candlelit rituals." He wasn't angry as he spoke. He was measured, controlled. But you couldn't miss the undercurrent of pain. They didn't have to fire me. They didn't have to cancel my contracts. They just had to stop calling. That's how the real blacklist works. You don't hear the gunshot, just the silence. Murphy said he tried to keep working for a while. He wrote scripts, pitched new ideas, did voiceover work, but he felt a barrier he couldn't name. People smiled in meetings, said all the right things, but nothing happened. Nothing stuck. It was like I was hovering just outside the gates. He ended the segment with a line that hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. You don't have to sell your soul in Hollywood, but if you don't, they'll convince everyone you never had one to begin with. When asked directly if he believed he was blacklisted, Eddie Murphy didn't hesitate. Yes, he said, and not in some dramatic, headline-grabbing way. In the quietest, most precise way possible. That's how the machine operates, through whispers, not warnings. He explained how the system works. No memos are sent, no studio head says, ban this person. But there are dinners, calls, little meetings behind frosted glass where someone says he's a liability. Eddie explained that after the party, his name became toxic in the rooms he used to own. A high-level executive even told a friend about him. Eddie didn't pass the test. When the friend asked what that meant, the executive just said he said no when he was supposed to say yes. Murphy took a deep breath before continuing. That's all it took. One no, and the doors don't slam shut anymore. They just don't open. He recalled that in the years that followed, his circle started to shrink. Producers who once called him a box office surefire bet began to distance themselves. Studios that begged for meetings now cited budget constraints or said they'd go in another direction. I watched the work vanish in slow motion. He said I'd submit pitches and get no response. Studio executives with Eddie's name listed next to not connected. Skip. The judge allowed the presentation. Murphy leaned into the mic. I'd meet with networks and they'd nod through the whole thing, then ghost me afterward. He added, you start questioning yourself. You start thinking maybe it's just timing, maybe the market. But then you hear the whispers, the things they say behind closed doors. The prosecution presented emails from a studio executive with Eddie's name listed next to not connected. Skip. The judge allowed the presentation. Murphy leaned into the mic. I want the court to understand one thing. Hollywood's blacklist doesn't wear a name tag. It wears a smile and shakes your hand while erasing you. He testified that refusing to join the party rituals and worse, deciding to leave, made him seem difficult and ungrateful in the machine's eyes. He said, I was labeled not for causing harm, but for refusing to be harmed. And then he touched on a deeper wound. There are people whose careers crumbled because they refused parties like that, because they saw what I saw and didn't want in. And we act like it's coincidence. It's not. Eddie wrapped up this part with a stark truth. Hollywood doesn't just make movies. It makes myths. And the biggest myth of all is that success is about talent. It's not. It's about compliance. Then Eddie moved on to the most damning part of his testimony so far, a part that left the audience stunned and prompted the defense to immediately request a sidebar. There's a list, Eddie said, a list that's not written down. Everyone in the industry knows about it. It's the people you don't criticize, the ones you don't question, because if you do, you disappear. The courtroom tensed up. The judge warned him to avoid speculation. Eddie nodded. I'm not speculating, Your Honor. I've lived it. He continued, Diddy is on that list. Tyler Perry is on that list. Oprah Winfrey, she helped write it. The jury shifted in their seats. Reporters furiously typed notes. Eddie explained that this so-called list isn't a document. It's a boundary invisible but enforced with terrifying precision. Once you speak out against someone on that list, your name gets passed around in whispers, not for what you did wrong, but for what you said. He said, that's how Diddy stayed untouchable for so long. It's not just his lawyers. It's not just the money. It's the fear. Fear that saying his name in a negative way will mean something. Murphy asserted that even people who didn't attend the parties protected Diddy because they'd built their careers on his goodwill. Tyler Perry knows him, Eddie said, and so do others. And they don't have to join the darkness. They just have to look the other way. The prosecutor asked Eddie if he'd ever talked to anyone about this list. He nodded. A fellow actor told me, you're crossing a line, man. They don't come back for those who go against them. Murphy didn't name the actor, but he hinted they were once close friends. We haven't spoken since, he said. That's the price you pay. You speak the truth, you lose your circle. The judge allowed Murphy to submit a collection of emails, texts, and call logs dated to show a clear shift in tone from key contacts after the infamous party. They don't tell you they're cutting you off, Eddie explained. They just stop replying. Your name goes from must-have to not now. And then came the most condemning statement of the day. You think Diddy blackmailed people all by himself? He had help. He was protected. He had a whole damn network. He looked at the jury and said, this isn't just about what happened in that house. It's about how many people stayed silent, how many checks had to be signed to make it go away, how many empires were built while the rest of us faded away. After recounting the destruction of his career, Eddie Murphy shifted to a more personal territory. The court listened intently as his tone changed. Less about facts, more about feelings. The prosecutor asked how these experiences affected him personally. Eddie stared ahead for a long second, then answered, it broke me. Not all at once, but piece by piece. It fades away slowly. It fell apart. And the more I tried to act like I was okay, the more it destroyed me. He admitted that he hadn't talked to anyone about what happened, not even his closest friends, because no one would believe me, he said. And worse, if they did believe me, they'd be next. He described the long stretches of silence in his life. There were days I didn't leave the house. I'd just sit in that chair replaying that night, not because of what others did to me, but because of what I saw others do to themselves. The fear was written all over their faces, fake smiles, people who thought they had no choice. Eddie started leaning on his family more than ever before. My kids saved me. I'd hear their laughter from another room and it brought me back. It reminded me of what's real, of what truly matters. He also turned to his faith not as a publicity tool, but as a lifeline. I stopped asking God why. I started asking him when. When will I speak? When will the world finally listen? When will the truth mean more than money? The courtroom was completely silent. Eddie revealed that he also sought therapy and spiritual counseling. He needed someone to help him overcome the guilt of walking away while others stayed behind. I kept wondering if I should have done more. Should I have pulled someone else out of that house with me? He paused, looking at Diddy. But now I realize the most dangerous thing I could do is stay silent. And I've been silent for too long. The prosecutor asked why he never wrote a book or gave interviews to expose it. Eddie smiled bitterly, because the ones who own the microphones are the ones holding the secrets. He ended this part with a profound statement about humanity. I lost the spotlight, but I found peace. And honestly, that's the first real role I've ever played. A man who finally escaped the lies. The prosecutor slowly approached. Mr. Murphy, why now? Why speak out today after all this time? Eddie exhaled, because the walls are finally starting to crumble. For the first time, I'm not the only one saying it. For the first time, the world is listening. He mentioned that seeing Cassie Ventura take the stand, hearing her voice choke as she recounted the horrors she endured. Something inside him shifted. Then Monique appeared, testifying with receipts, records, and years of suffering packed into a soft, steady voice. Then the prince's recording resurfaced. A man who's been dead for years, warning about things no one wanted to hear while he was alive. Eddie said that I realized I couldn't sit this one out. Not again. Not while the blood is still wet on the floor. He explained that for years fear had held him back. Not just fear of losing his job, but of retaliation. Fear that his truth would be twisted. I've seen what happens to people who speak up. They're not just canceled, they're erased. But now the silence has been fully broken. This trial has changed everything. Eddie told the jury that there's a domino effect happening here, and I'd rather be the next one to stand for the truth than sit back protecting a lie. He described watching Diddy shout in court, seeing his defenses crumble, seeing public opinion shift not because of headlines, but because of what was finally sworn under oath. I don't need a book deal. I don't need redemption. I need peace. And peace only comes when the truth outweighs the lies. He added that his kids are grown now and recently asked him why he stopped acting. I couldn't look them in the eye and say it was because I was tired. That wouldn't be right. I stopped because I didn't want to lose myself chasing a career. He looked at the jury. I'm not doing this to take down Diddy. I'm doing this so no one else has to suffer under his thumb. The judge called for a recess, and as Eddie stood up, dozens of people in the courtroom rose with him, not out of formality, but out of respect. As the trial continued, the atmosphere shifted, becoming heavier, more focused. Everyone could feel that Eddie's time on the stand was winding down, but no one could predict how he'd wrap it up. The prosecutor asked the final question. In your view, Mr. Murphy, what's the most important thing the jury and the public should take away from your testimony today? Eddie paused for a long moment, then leaned into the mic. That Hollywood doesn't run on talent. It runs on compliance. You could hear a pin drop. Eddie explained further, it rewards obedience, not integrity. And the moment you stop nodding along, stop pretending you find yourself on the outside looking in. I've seen good people turn into puppets. I've seen grown men eat crow just to get on a casting list. And the ones laughing the loudest are the ones pulling the strings. Then he stared down at the defense table. This man didn't build an empire. He built a trap, and too many of us walked right into it, thinking we were climbing a ladder. Eddie looked back at the jury. I could have said something sooner. I should have. But I'm saying it now because what's done in the dark is coming to light, and all of you are the first to see it without blinking. He stood up. The judge thanked him. The courtroom was silent. Diddy, clearly in shock, had nothing left to say. Eddie Murphy, once the biggest star in comedy, just delivered the most serious testimony of his life.